Welcome back, everybody. Guess what? Jobless claims are down. That means the economy is recovering. America is on a path forward. No, I'm just kidding. These numbers are manipulated, and you can't trust anything that's coming out of this administration now, or any of the numbers that we're actually getting. Not when they're shuffling people in and out of these institutions that are just sycophants, that have openly expressed the idea that the manipulation of statistics to push an agenda is actually acceptable. The truth is, the American people have no actual idea of what's happening anymore because trusted institutions have been corrupted. That's what it is. But anyway, let's have a look.
Here we go, and the data's coming out. Let's see where we're going to begin here. Let's start with initial jobless claims, shall we? 218,000. Wow, we're expecting a number around 234,000. 218,000, that would be the smallest since the third week of July when it was 217,000. That's definitely going to put a little pop in interest rates. And continuing claims coming in on the light side, still 1.9 million, 1,926,000. We've been really consolidating right above 1.9 million.
I think I'm going to wait for the revisions on this one, folks, and I think we all should. But then again, at the same time, the revisions will probably come back saying that actually we don't have any jobless people, that everyone's working because this administration's been such a success. But it used to be that the only real honest numbers that we would see would be the revised numbers. But at that point, all you get is oopsie, we just got it wrong. At that point, they just kind of shuffle on to the next thing. Forget that America is plummeting into an economic abyss where people can't get jobs, people can't afford things, and the CEO of Walmart's in danger of not affording another yacht. You see, the truth, the real truth is buried in the data, but it's buried deeper and harder to find than evidence for a mob hit. It's called the U6 rate, and that's exactly what we should be looking at. The U6 is where they keep all the people the politicians want you to forget about. It's the miserable truth rate. The U6 consists of a various group of people. The first group is the involuntary part-time people. These are the folks who can't get a full-time job. It can't be 40 hours. They desperately need a 40-hour and up job, but they just can't get it. So these are the kind of people who fall into the gig economy normally. The people who work multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. Then you have the marginally attached and the discouraged workers. These are the people who have been waiting for a new job, right? The people who've been putting in 1,000 applications on Indeed. The people who looked at the 14-step application process with 5 or 6 interviews and just said, you know what? I'm not doing it anymore. So they just stopped trying. These people just have given up essentially. And this is a growing number in this economy in America right now. These are the people who looked in the corporate abyss, and the abyss looked back and said, we're going to need you to update 3 different formats of your resume and manually type it in. So they gave up. They left the casino. The government says that they exited the labor market, but I'd say they gained a kind of enlightenment that you can only get through sheer apathy and unadulterated brokenness. The thing is, they're no longer a statistic, so they're not counted. Right? They're just on the couch somewhere. And no one cares about them, and America has forgotten about them, so they don't even count them in the jobless number. The ultimate tell for this crumbling economy, though, is really the number that they hope you're never actually bored enough to look up. It's the labor participation rate. That's the percentage of people who could be working, who are either working or are looking for work, and that number has been dropping for decades. I mean, we can blame it on the baby boomers for not retiring. Of course, that is a thing. But things have just gotten so expensive that most people can't retire. So the people who built the investments enough for them to become millionaires are finding themselves in the place where what they save for retirement is just enough to pay the bills, but not enough to actually live off of. So instead of taking maybe more of a menial job, that's enough to provide them a lifestyle at least, they just decided, they got to this point in their career, we're just going to stay here until we die. We're going to die at our desk. We're not going to relinquish this position and free it up for people who've been working for a decade or two trying to climb the corporate ladder. We're just going to have it be clogged. We're going to burn that ladder, and we're going to have these people just be stacked on top of one another. And the problem is, when these people are stacked up on top of one another, they become redundant because that natural flow of career progression has been stopped. And you got to start cutting people away. Here come the layoffs. That, of course, increases the jobless numbers, but of course, we're not going to be able to include them because those are highly skilled people who have a very niche knowledge, who usually have some kind of leadership position. And those are the positions that aren't often needed. So you have a multitude of people who are trying to find a job position that was equal to the one they had, but those job positions just aren't there anymore because the boomers aren't retiring, because they can't afford to. Love them or hate them, that's where we're at. The thing is, we are having an explosion of people who are trying to get jobs, right? And that's because the only jobs that you can get out there, and there are many jobs that are open, it's just they don't actually pay enough. So we're having an expansion of the gig economy once again, but we all know that the gig economy isn't enough for people to live. There's a decimation of the job market right now. And there's an absolute lie and delusion that's being pushed on the American population to believe that it's just because they're lazy. But it's not because you're lazy. It's because the jobs just aren't there. And even if the boomers all go ahead and retire, the thing is the jobs aren't going to be there because the corporations are just getting rid of those jobs. And God forbid what happens if the government actually shuts down and they decide to do mass firings again. Now the job market's going to be flooded with even more experienced candidates, which are going to create more scarcity of positions in the market, increasing the jobless numbers. But at the same time, the numbers that we're going to get from the government, we can't trust because the bootlickers in charge at this point are so far up MAGA's ass that they can't tell the truth. They can't look at the American people, look them in the eye and actually tell them the truth because it's going to be against the narrative. But the people are tired of the narrative. The people want jobs. The people want security and stability, but we can't have it because it's inconvenient for those who are in charge right now to actually face reality, to actually say that the jobs aren't there, that the economy is shit, that Americans are living in a nation of two nations right now, one of blinding success and one that's moving even deeper into a crippling kind of poverty that the people cannot rise from. It should make you angry. It should make you emotional. You're not being irrational when you look at this and you feel a sense of dread. That's a normal reaction when you're in a dreadful situation. That's what America's becoming. America is becoming a deeply dreadful nation. And the condition of the American people is declining. The lifestyle that your parents and your grandparents had, your children, if you have any, if you can afford some, will never actually be able to have that unless they're in the top 1%. Because the working poor is expanding at a rate that society just cannot deal with, while at the same time we're cutting any kind of resources that should be there to provide the security and support that people need when they're let go, what people need when they're fired, or their job has just been erased or taken over by AI. But what do? At the same time, we're going to build great data centers that are going to jack up everyone's electric bills. We're going to make it so health insurance is more unaffordable for the most poor people in this country. Not just increase what they have to pay, but increase the premiums. Almost triple what people were paying. And expect people on fixed incomes, people who are disabled and can't work, people who they couldn't make a decent go of it, make them suffer. But we're supposed to be proud of this. We're supposed to call this great. No, there's nothing great about this. And the position that the American people are in right now, but still have their blinders on and are unable or unwilling to actually voice their concerns about the changes that are happening in their lives and the lives of their loved ones. We have to have the courage to actually voice our opinions and our worries to those who we have elected to represent us. Because if they fail to represent us, then they should be removed from power. I often look at the state of this nation and the decline that it's been in over my generation and wonder at what point the people will think it's actually necessary for revolution. This isn't me calling for one. This is just me making an observation. There hasn't been an actual revolution in America in a very long time, but we've seen a steady decline. Purposely done, and the greatest wealth transfer. We hear this every few years at this point. 3 years ago was the greatest wealth transfer. 5 years ago was the greatest wealth transfer. We're in the middle of the greatest wealth transfer. When a small percentage of the American population is responsible for 50% of the spending, and 90% of the population is fighting over 10% of the national wealth, you have a massive problem that leads into the kind of revolution that they saw in France. And at this point, I can only see it as being an inevitable outcome as long as we have the failures of our elected officials as they remain in office. None of this seems to change in any way. And there's no voice out there except for a few that are actually calling for it. And they're not taken seriously. They're only seen as crackpots, or they're demonized by their own parties and seen as a danger, and they don't actually speak for us. But the us that they talk about is just the same status quo elites that have never represented us Americans in the first place. But anytime we have a champion of the people come up, they get squashed. They get called a lunatic or a communist. And often the only thing that they're arguing is these people need affordable health care. These kids need school lunches. People need to be able to afford to feed their families. They need to be able to afford to have houses. If that's the stance that you consider radical, then you have much more of a problem in the soulless condition in which you live than I do as someone who believes that everyone should have the right to go see a doctor. And that's the reality of the situation right now in America. The jobless numbers that are coming out are a lie, even with the revisions that come out. We know that the real number of people who are jobless in America is almost 25%. 1 in 4 people, 25%, a quarter of the population, a quarter of the workforce in America is not working. And when you strip away their support, it's a very desperate people and a very desperate, very large population of people that you create that now exist in your country. And there's a danger to that because scarcity can turn people into monsters. And sadly, this administration, this government, this system that we're in needs monsters to justify its actions against the people. Thanks for stopping by.